And I apologize in advance also for the fact that some of the talk is a little more technical today than perhaps you're used to, but that's only going to be about 5 minutes, and so you'll be able to get the gist anyway of what I'm trying to say. The title of the talk is The Heritability of World IQ Differences. And I want to say what the IQ differences around the world are, and then ask the question of, can we know whether these differences are due to the genes, or are they just due to cultural factors? And I will be arguing that it's due to the genes and providing some good new evidence to show that. So if we can have the next slide. This is a picture of the world IQ map of the indigenous populations of the world as they existed around 1490. The data are legion. There's about 620 studies now of IQ from about 120 nations. They have been collated by Richard Lynn more than anybody else. His 2 books are on sale from Louis Andrews, Washington Summit Publishers. You can buy them, they're great books. Also, Michael Hart has a new book out on IQ and how they originated from an evolutionary perspective as the populations moved around the world. And his is a new book. It's well recommended. So if you're in the book buying mode, there's 3 of them you can buy. In any case, this is a summary, and what I want to do is to very quickly just highlight 2 or 3 aspects of the map, especially for those of you who can't see it. The standardized IQ is, if you look at Eurasia, from England all the way through Western Europe out to Siberia and out of Mongolia, the average IQ is 100. And what that means is, in effect, the general intelligence or cognitive ability of a 16-year-old. So that is like the standard benchmark against which everything else is calibrated. And there are various corrections and calibrations that are required of a technical nature, but we won't get into that. Just take my word for it that the average is 100, standardized on Europe, and everything else is relative to that. And so then I'll take your attention to sub-Saharan Africa. There, the average IQ is 70. And in the Western world, we often think of an IQ of 70 as being borderline mentally retarded. But that's not a really useful way of looking at sub-Saharan African IQ. Africans are not borderline retarded. It's much better to look at them as having a mental age relative to the 16-year-olds of Europe of about 11-year-olds. And of course, an 11-year-old is not mentally retarded. An 11-year-old can do, cognitively speaking, all kinds of things. They can work in factories and under supervision at pretty high technical levels in factories. They can work in the fields. Obviously, they can make war, houses, and so on. Kalashnikov, who invented the great gun that is preferred in South Africa, in Africa, and Southern Asia, says even children can use this gun and maintain it. And that's sort of like an estimate of what you can do as an 11-year-old with cognitive ability. Now, there are about 60 or 70 studies from East, West, Central, and South Africa, and a lot of people say, well, I just don't believe an IQ of 70 for Black Africa, but as I'll come on to, it's a very reliable finding. In fact, as I say, there are 620 studies, so there's a lot of reliability in these measures. If I take your attention now to the yellow part of the map, which is China, Japan, these are East Asians. And it comes as a surprise to some people to learn that East Asians actually have a slightly higher IQ than do Europeans. If Europeans are standardized at a cognitive ability of about 16, East Asians have a cognitive ability of a 17-year-old. And this is very reliable again. And it doesn't matter whether you look at the East Asians in China and Japan or whether you look at their immigrants in other countries of the world. It's amazing how critics of IQ studies never ever focus on that particular measure. They only focus on the Black Africans being so much lower. I should also mention, I suppose, that Black Americans, African Americans, have an IQ of 85, which is midway between the sub-Saharan African IQ of 70 and the European IQ of 100. I'll very briefly just mention the American Indians, North and South America. The average IQ there is about 85. Now, the Hispanic populations that are coming into the United States in particular have a higher IQ than that. It's about 90, maybe even 92, some people will argue. And the Hispanics, of course, are a hybrid mixed-race population of Spanish whites plus American Indians. And so they will have a slightly higher IQ as a result. What I really want to focus in on, and this is, I think, something even more controversial than black-white differences, is the IQ of a group called the South Asians / North Africans. On the map, this is a yellow, orangey segment that goes right across North Africa, all the way out to Bangladesh. And genetic studies show that this is a very heterogeneous population, but there are some genetic similarities among that group that goes from Bangladesh through the Indian subcontinent, India, out through Pakistan, Afghanistan, into Turkey and the Middle East, Iran, down through Saudi Arabia, into Jordan, the Arab population of Israel, Egypt, and all the way across North Africa. This particular grouping is different from the Europeans to their north, the sub-Saharan Africans to their south, and obviously the East Asians to their east. And they have an average IQ of 85. And there are about 60 different studies showing that. And furthermore, if you look at the immigrants from those countries, in England or Holland or South Africa or Mauritius or Fiji or the different places that they have immigrated to, their IQs are commensurate with the the original populations from where they come. So this is pretty reliable stuff. If you go to the next slide, you'll see some indication here of just how reliable those data are. This is actually taken from Steve Saylor's essay. He did a big review of Richard Lynn's book, and one of the things he did was to plot the stability of those IQ scores for three different populations. I think at the top end is the Japanese and Japan, in the middle is the Hispanic populations to America, and at the very bottom is the Australian Aborigines, which I didn't actually mention, but they're even lower IQ than the sub-Saharan Africans. And he shows that across time, the different studies that have been done, they don't change much. They're just consistent and reliable and so on. And that shows, to some extent, how reliable these data are. If we go to the next slide, this again is a measure of the reliability, and it also illustrates something else. These are the Chinese in China and the Indians in India across time. But what it also shows is that there's no comparison. We're always hearing in the media that India is a new superpower, just like China. Well, yes, it's true of China. China will have a man on the moon. They'll have a manned moon station up there permanently. They are potentially a great competitor or a great ally, cooperator with the United States. They have the brains to be equal or higher than we are. India, that's just not the case. The average IQ in India is 85. So, yes, they're growing in economics, but they're not China, and you can see that from that slide. Okay, if we go to the next slide,